Welcome to Responsibility for Freedom with Luke, the Freedom Show. And I got a regular guest on, the co-author of the Freedom Handbook, the person that I wrote the book with. And we're going to talk about something that I did a rant on. I think it's going to be a quick one today. We're going to be talking about the Muslims. And if anyone hasn't seen it, you can check out, I think we'll put a link below. You can check out the rant that I did on my take on how we got to treat this Muslim phenomenon that's going around the world. And I know that Chris and I were having a conversation about that earlier, and he wanted to bring up the aspect that he wanted to bring up that I think other people might be concerned with as well. So Chris, how you doing today?
Pretty darn good. Happy as ever to be here with you. And as Luke said, we'll just give you a shot of you can see the book behind me in the background, but there's a nice shot of the paperback. You know, she's pretty big. She comes to 600 references, 300 plus quotes, and the hardcover. Pretty fun stuff. There's another working title, No Government, No Problem. Pretty fun stuff. And if you like what you see and you want to support us, then you can buy shirts on our website and stuff like that, and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, lots of fun to be here. And boy, yeah, big conversation. There's lots of pieces to this Muslim equation. Your rant was really great last week. And like a lot of people, you know, I think there's a lot of sense to it that really hit home. I mean, we got to stop pandering about, right? Like it's all about brutal honesty. And we know that wisdom begins by calling things by their right name. Is that Confucius? I can't remember. But that's an old quote. And, you know, I mean, we can't obviously figure a problem out if we can't identify it, first of all, and certainly if we're lying to ourselves about it. I mean, that's just common sense. And we also know how difficult it is to face some of the problems, you know, in a contemporary sense, whatever they are that the culture is dealing with, because a lot of times there are censored speech and there are pushes against ideas and stuff that can make it tough out at work and at play, never mind in the marketplace of ideas, if you care to actually enter the ring. So let's hone in, I think, on the problem, Luke, because I think we agreed. A fun way to look at the Muslim equation, just like any equation, you know, in some sense, we could be the homeless. We could look at the homeless people, poverty, whatever, a human issue. But when we look at the Muslim population, that's over 1 billion people, like Luke said in his rant, around the world. So, Luke, would you agree that maybe a great place to start would say, and Luke sent me a video today that we're going to put a link to below, entitled "British Apostate Tells Tommy Robinson Muslims Tried to Kill Me." And it's a story of 16 years of absolute horror that this British man and his family, you know, have endured for converting to Christianity from Muslim. You know, but whether you're an atheist, if you're trying to leave the Muslim faith, and it doesn't matter whether, because, you know, the first thing I brought up when I saw Luke's rant and I asked him about it was, well, what about a reformation? Like, there's got to be something we can do for these people. So back to the question, 1 billion people. Some of these people can be saved. And when we say saved, I mean, I know that's a charged statement, but, you know, I mean to say that they can have a better life. They can enjoy more freedom, as is the topic of our show. So, if our goal is to increase these people's freedoms and global freedoms in general, how do we go about it? And when Luke quantified, you know, the Muslim tradition, putting it in a camp with, you know, the Hitlers and so on, I think he was right in a lot of senses. And the thought also came out to mind of a cult. So it's a cult in some ways, I think is better said, because, you know, Luke was raised in the Jehovah's Witness, which is extreme, you know, and there's lots of other Scientology he raised, which is also pretty extreme for, you know, in terms of penalty for trying to leave, you know, get out of, go do some research on that. They're pretty violent, in fact, you know, but hardly, they don't even hold a candle to the Muslim tradition. You know, you could imagine growing up in a Muslim society where, you know, people are stoned to death in the street every day, gay people are thrown off buildings, you know, rape is just rampant. I mean, it just goes on and on and on in terms of the brutal medieval, like, horror, feudal violence and horror that's a part of that society every day. And if you want to leave, like, it doesn't matter whether you're, like I wrote down here, atheist, Christian, excuse me, you could be a Hindu, you could be a Buddhist, doesn't matter what it is, Muslims will kill you unless you're Islam. And if you're Islam and then you want to leave, they'll kill you too. And that's got to scare a lot of people. And so for a lot of people, what do you think? Yeah, pick it up, Luke. What do you think? What can we do for these people?
Okay, so there's two sides of the equation. Before we talk about how do we fix the predominantly Muslim influenced countries, is we got to save our culture, or there's going to be no place of refuge for anyone, right? And so what I was prominently warning was the West. We got to stop apologizing, making excuses, having the stupid arguments about, oh, it's not all Muslims. And when you watch the rant, you'll understand where I speak about we condemn entire groups of people for the actions of a few. And I don't think anyone can argue with the fact that not all Nazis or the people who supported Nazism or was a part of that all committed murder or joined the military. We know that's not even possible. The Ku Klux Klan, you can't believe that every member of the Ku Klux Klan committed in violence. But we could certainly say, well, they must advocate it, or their fundamental beliefs are racist. So if someone says, well, I'm a Ku Klux Klan member, they're supporting the ideology of the group. And when someone says I'm a Muslim, they're supporting the ideology of the foundation is Muhammad is the prophet of God, the final true prophet of God. If we can't dismiss those ideas as a culture, our Western culture, this is where we got to start. So if we socially shun when somebody says they're Muslim, and I advocate no violence at all. It's not what I'm talking about. We don't hunt down, in my rant, we don't hunt down Ku Klux Klan members and try to burn them out of their house if we find out they are one. But we certainly don't give them a public welcome. And like I said, they don't walk around with their hats on, right? Because they would get weird looks. They would get
shouts.
It would be publicly shamed.
I agree wholeheartedly, Luke. If I could interject one thing here.
Yeah.
This is one key strategy that I agree wholeheartedly needs to be employed here in the West. So let's focus, like you said, on the West first. So
what I'm trying to say is, if we don't have a safe haven for our culture to at least, we can self-criticize and try to make it as good as we can. But if we wholesale import Muslims from the Muslim world, predominantly Muslim, and they're creating their own communities, and every Muslim community in the Western world, when they get to a certain point, start implementing Sharia law, enforcing it upon their women, and then violence and rape starts to happen.
Okay, but listen.
Where's the safe place? So if we got to have you understand what I'm saying? We got to have a safe place for them to come.
Check this out. This Christian man in the UK says for 16 years, he went to politician after politician, religious leader after religious leader in the Christian community, Western institutions with Western values that won't uphold exactly the letter of the law and the morals and the beliefs and the values that the institutions were founded on, by way of the fact that everybody ignored him, nobody will talk to him, nobody will protect him, and the police will countless video of the man having gangs waiting. The guy had to have a police escort out of his neighborhood. He was nearly killed however many times, certainly once on film, right in the street. I mean, it goes on and on and on. They won't act in his defense. And we've seen this again and again and again. Acid attacks in the UK. Never mind condemning the Muslims and importing them. Now, first of all, we got to stop importing them. We know that doesn't work. Multiculturalism, even Merkel said, everybody can agree. Now, mind you, it's a slow-moving, but the politics responds to culture, right? So if culture's already there, then, those policies are already becoming, in Germany and Italy, they're already being enforced and starting. But what else needs to happen? Well, first of all the women being genitally mutilated, all the acid attacks, all the attacks on the Jewish people, the Hindu people, the Buddhist people, the Christian people in our Western country. The girls being raped and groomed. Until we actually enforce the values that we supposedly believe in here, when you talk about protecting and cultivating, it's not just about the borders. And even if we start, and how could we, what if we took your advice? And the first thing we fixed was we started to publicly shame the Muslims. Now, I don't think it would be a far cry from what you're suggesting. If the culture could get there, then we would probably already be condemning the horrific behavior. But I think the horrific behavior that's going on in our schools and everywhere in our culture, we've got to stop that right fucking now.
No,
you don't accept it from anybody else.
Well, this is where you're 100% correct, and I never spoke about that solution or even attempted to in my rant. And you bring up a valid point. What do we do with the problem right here? Well, first of all, our politicians and are basically run by the far left because the media is basically far left. So is our politicians. So this politically correct, don't incite hatred amongst this group of people because they're so bloody violent, because they're organized, because they radicalize very quickly, and they all support this ideology that you can't poke at. And so when somebody tries to leave it and they commit crimes, violence, murder, rape, acid attacks, our culture, our law enforcement needs to go after them like nobody's business. If anyone is watching this who lives in the Western world, you want to see how quickly and efficient the government can be. Stop paying your taxes and post a few YouTube videos about it and host a seminar and watch what happens to you. Your life is destroyed. They can't tolerate it. That's it. You're done. You're finished. They'll take away your business, your bank account, your house. They'll leave you destitute in the street. They don't care. They're ruthless. What do they do with organized crime? If they get a hold of it or find out about it, or gangs pushing drugs, the government is pretty efficient at doing something about these things, especially when it gets out of hand. Like, it's one thing if it's underground, but when there's too many drive-bys or there's too many gang violence, the society, puts so much pressure on the police and on the city that it's happening and that they have to do something. But this Muslim mayhem is going on because nobody wants to go over there because it's politically incorrect, and they don't want to be seen as racist, and letting them get away with murder. So you're right
with the amount of victims. Like, first of all, there's so many victims that if even the victims stood up and yelled, now the problem is they are yelling, but they're not getting the attention, like you said, of the media. But the thing that's driving me crazy, like you said, we've got to make these changes culturally. Amongst you and me, these conversations are exactly how it happens, right, Luke? And so, with everybody out there on the internet, you think about it, like, if your child hasn't been raped, you're not far from somebody who has. If you don't know somebody who's been violently attacked and blah, like, these things are happening in our community, and we have to stand up and say it's just not acceptable. The same way the world is finally, I think, standing up. I think we talked maybe the first show, and pushing back against pedophilia. Not only is there an agenda to try to make it socially acceptable, and of course there's the polarization going on, whatever.
I think you should put a link to that TED Talks, which is just disgusting.
Oh my goodness. Well, there's the TED Talk, and the other one that I sent you, which is the review. Wonderful channel we just found, reviewed it, linking not just that TED Talk, but Camille Paglia's talk about androgyny. Pick it up. Go ahead, Luke. Sorry.
No, and there is a culture, a society that we could look at as an example. That's Japan. Japan doesn't have Muslim attacks and these types of things that are going on. And
Poland, Hungary, Austria.
Right. And if you look at their policies and their laws, you might look at those laws and say, well, they're racist, or they literally in Japan, they literally cannot practice their religion. They cannot build a mosque. If they're caught praying in public, they're thrown in prison, period, end of discussion. They won't tolerate it. And there are Muslims in that country, but Japan says unequivocally, and they make no apologies for it, we're watching you. You get out of line, you do anything, we'll deport you and your entire family. We don't care. We don't care how many generations you've been here. Now, it seems to be if somebody was actually trying to get away from that oppressive example, because a lot of people point to Muslims who immigrated 20, 30 years ago, 15 years ago. And I do believe they are different. They may call themselves Muslim, but they're not acting that way. They're not trying to implement those things.
Well, the man the topic of the video is of that ilk. He wasn't even he didn't immigrate. He was born in the UK, for goodness sakes. His parents immigrated, but he's again. We know there's the regression to the mean. There's a lot of radicalization that are concerns in the second and third generation. So it doesn't really matter in terms of the first people coming in. Sometimes what their motivations are. If the numbers are big enough, that you've got a big problem on your hands.
And everybody just we can't think we're immune to. We can't let our tolerance destroy us. And every society, no matter how far back you go, it's all predicated upon ideas. But those ideas seem to change because humans forget the past. They don't. Values aren't instilled. They talk about the Roman Empire was basically when the moral decay took place, when the decadence came in and the orgies, and you could see it in their artwork. They said that was the cracking in the foundation for the empire to fall apart, and that's where the breakdown of the family and morality comes in.
That's right.
There's a lot of things, but our social awareness is basically based upon our set of ideals that we like, and I don't think anybody would argue that the West is tolerant. The West has, we like to be safe, as any group would be.
Isn't tolerant, you mean to say? And
well, the West.
Yeah, no, but you said nobody would argue that the West is tolerant. And I think you meant to say nobody would argue that we are not tolerant.
Yeah, right. Yes. Yeah. We're accepting, that's right. What I meant.
Yeah.
So, and to our own fault. But we can't, like I say, we just can't wholesale import people and say, hey, don't worry, they'll just be like us, and then ignore it. So, okay, that's one thing to try the experiment, okay? I get it. Because sometimes people, when somebody prophesizes something that bad's going to happen, it's hard to believe him. And maybe he's wrong. And then what if we implemented everything he said and prevented it? It would be hard to say.
And what if we could do it better? What if we could learn from mistakes and do it better this time?
Right. And so, look, I'll give you well, I think what's going on in South Africa, Lauren Southern said, well, there's a genocide. Now, she admits at the end of her documentary it's not a genocide yet. But I think if you objectively look at the culture, the government, the rules, the laws that are being implemented.
Well, that's a genocide.
It's on its way to a genocide. I don't think anybody could argue that.
Well, it's not at those numbers. But the policies are the same. The only thing that's missing is the mass, is the numbers to have reached that scale. Do we really have to wait?
Right. And I think when one group of people is trying to wipe out another group, I think we know when that's happening, and it's bad news.
Right.
And we don't like it when we.
And that's the rainbow reality.
Right. But we have to be objective and smart enough to say, well, what's the road? Like, what's that road look like? Okay, so we're on a path. Are we moving towards a greater society, right? Are we moving towards, I hate to use this word enlightenment because that sounds like some fantastic end of the rainbow idea, but are we moving towards a better life for our children?
More freedom.
Because I think that's what everybody would, any parent would want, a better life for their children. Well, if we look at the state of our health, there's so much work to be done. There's some serious things there, and we'll talk about that in another video, but specifically, the accepting of a religious ideal. And first of all, I don't believe the Muslim faith is a religion. I believe it's an ideology. And if you look at the foundation, that's why I walked away from my religion, is because I looked at the men who started it. And, some could argue, well, they have strong family values and what harm are they causing? Well, that's debatable. Not integrating with society, not being part of society and hoping they all die so you can take over their houses. I don't know. I think it's a little warped way to grow up. But
when you say they're debatable, they're going to be case. I agree with you. I don't think it's debatable, perhaps, maybe even not, that it is that there is real value there, because Christianity, of course, did horrible things in the name of Christianity, just like Judaism and lots of other religions.
Well, I'd like to say something about that.
Sure.
And I want to clarify this. The biggest difference there is because we talk about, Christianity had to go through its enlightenment or whatever. listen, Christians did do things, right? The Catholic Church, although they never said they condoned it, we certainly know they didn't try to stop it, burning of the stake as an example. And there was other things, the Spanish Inquisition done in the name of religion. But the fundamental difference was no priest, no Christian on earth who ever committed a violent act against another person could point to a scripture and verse in the Bible and said, see, Jesus said it was allowed here, okay? They could.
Well, they tried to all the time.
But we know it doesn't exist.
They were lying, yeah.
Yeah, and the difference here with the Muslim world is there's nothing a Muslim can't do and point to a scripture and verse and say, Muhammad did it, it's a lot, like it's advocating. That's a big difference in my mind.
Well, I think you laid out an eloquent case in the rant, and you people should check that out because it was a short rant. It was really fast, packed full of common sense. And as far as you really unpacked that well. What's wrong with the ideology? How are we looking at it wrong? And the only other critique I had of the other than looking at that, how do we reformation of the religion? Is it possible? And we'll come back to that in half a second. And then how do we save the people that are savable? And they're in a bit of a different situation, I think, than even the Jehovah's Witness or Scientologists. In fact, or the North Koreans, which we talked about, is people that get a lot of sympathy around the planet. And I think that the Islamic people who want to leave the faith and that culture are in an even worse situation. So there's some heavy factors there in terms of what to do about those people, even in our culture. Oh, and the one other thing that we needed to do that I forgot to mention, the biggest thing, and everybody would love this because this is the progressive side of it working. So I think we do need not government programs and state fucking programs, but what we need is exactly what that Brit said, which are charities and not-for-profit, community-funded, run organizations to help the people in the West and the other parts of the world next. Okay, so there's the distinction there. But first thing we got to do is help the people in the West who are like this British man, interested in leaving the Muslim faith. And whether they have other religious ideas or atheist, it doesn't matter what it is or where they come from, what they're doing. If they're facing, violence and all the apostasy threats, then they need help. And if we can, so in the West, of 1 billion people in the planet, let's just say there's, I don't know, however many in the West that we could, that would really help then build a foundation for the rest of them to figure out the rest of their crap. Okay, so then, coming back to whether the religion's is savable and the ideology and religious aspect of it, I agree with you, first of all, but I don't even think we need to get into the ideas because then it can get muddy and then there's room for interpretation. Let's just look at the facts. Let's forget what the book says. Let's just look at what happened. Like you say, the Christian people did lots of awful things just like everybody else on the planet. Okay, fine. So, nobody's apologizing for Genghis Khan. They still make statues, right? Like they're really proud of the guy, right? Same thing with, lots of other crazy people like Mussolini. Franco has a lot of fans here in Spain still, I'm telling you what. Okay, every dictator around the world, except for Hitler and except for Britain, because we're not allowed to. Although there's still resurgence in a.
Well, they're trying to take down the statue of Columbus and replace it with I can't remember his name, but he literally killed every white person on the island of Honduras, I think. And they're trying to put a statue up. What? I don't think we should.
Yeah.
I don't think we tolerate anybody who kills another race.
Yeah. So what are the facts with what the Muslim tradition has done around the world? Like, has it done any good? And because, all these scientific realizations, and there is some, I believe, as far as I know, there is some truth to the fact that they preserved some writings in their own libraries that would have been destroyed as the world got sacked and moved around and stuff from Greece and Rome and Constantinople and stuff like that. And then in the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, some stuff more stuff they say would have been lost, and some stuff was able to be recovered because they held on to it. It's highly debatable whether they invented a damn thing. Certainly they haven't invented even the bloody wheel as far as I understand. Okay, so whether they've discovered anything, invented anything, created anything is highly debatable, but obviously there are contributions. I shouldn't say anything. Created a large amount of value for the world. Now, I'm not saying they haven't, because that's to be an insult. The culture does provide value. There is value there, and they have done and accomplished things. I think, namely, protecting some of those documents, I think, from our ancient past was one of the biggest contributions. However, aside from that, there is not one positive thing that I can point to that they have done. There's no, like you say, leap forward in terms of freedoms for their people. There's nothing but war, death, and now you said it, it comes from the book. But let's forget where the instructions come from. It doesn't matter. Let's just look at the evidence. There's nothing but death and destruction and rape and intolerance at the highest level. Now, one of the pieces of media for this channel, tolerance and virtue, are the last qualities of a dying society, or last virtues of a dying society, right? Tolerance and what is it? Not tolerance and virtue. It's tolerance and apathy. That's what it is. Tolerance and apathy are the last virtues of a dying society. So you said that. I thought of that when you were talking earlier, Luke. We can't put up with the shit that's going on. We got to call it for what it is. We got to provide help for the people that are in that situation now, because they're the most vulnerable. They're almost as bad as children. Of the adults on the planet, the North Koreans have an easier time. Okay? So they're of the adults on the planet, the Muslims have the toughest time. Now, should we point our finger at them and call them names? Probably. But we should also help them leave, because it's so retarded. We should, and their brothers and sisters will kill them, and they're all scared. So let's figure that out first. Let's stop all the crime that's going on in our neighborhoods. And I just can't even believe we can't care about it. Like the fact that Britain allowed that to happen. It came public, and the people aren't rioting in the streets and throwing those people in the fucking sea already. I don't understand. And the same thing in Germany and stuff, like when the guys, behead women in the streets. How many times have you read that or heard that in the last month? Where some crazy guy goes out and beheads a woman or a baby.
I think we should put a link. We should put a link to the website. I believe it's called I Am Human, or We Are Human, and they post all the Muslim attacks around the world, but specifically look at the ones going on in Europe. I saw a video where somebody was streaming them, and I paused it, and I read what I could see on the screen, and then I paused and let it run for another second, and read what was on the screen. I'm telling you, without any without any embellishment, okay? I'm telling you, if you read that, you wouldn't, if you were planning a vacation to Europe, you wouldn't go. You wouldn't go. Like we're talking the most mundane, middle of the day in the street. There's a guy with a machete walking down the street after he just beheaded a mother and his child at a resort. A taxi cab driver. I mean, I was just horrified when I was reading it. This is going on in society, not being reported about, being hidden, and then all at the same time bringing in more immigrants and allowing illegal immigrants to pour in and not deporting them or welcoming. This is setting up a situation where you're basically going to destroy yourself. And these politicians, maybe it's not their children that's been affected yet, or their neighborhoods have been affected yet. They're living in a damn bubble, but somebody's suffering the consequences of this, and it's the people you're supposed to call your fellow countrymen. These aren't isolated incidences.
No. Well, you bring that up, and not to respond to the fear, but I want to share with people, because you bring this up, and this is a very visceral, palpable, like I can feel this. My heart rate went up. Literally, my heart sort of jumped in my chest when you said, when you talked about people reading, because I know the list you're talking about, and I've done the same thing, and it's not only jaw dropping, it's like horrifying to read. Like you say, those are factual, like police accounts. So, like it's sort of in that language so when you read like what they have to say, you're just like, holy crap, about what these people are doing. chopping us to bits in our streets all day long. But I'm moving. It's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to a million things about moving to that city. But the truth of it is, I'm also actually scared. And I'm aware. I'm far from a victim. But I'm also aware that of the ripe danger. And in fact, I'm moving to a place that is ripe for terrorism. Just like you talk about, like, never mind somebody chopping somebody's head off in the street in front of me, because that's a real viable reality, certainly. But I mean a terrorist attack by way of mass killing, where they're taking vehicles and bombs and trains and whatever it is, stark reality. And I'm moving to that from a place where I'm safe from that. Why would I do that? It's not because I want to go there and, you know, in some ways protest and help them fight it and kick it out, like I said to you that we should do. Not that I won't be doing my own humble best in some sense. But it's a reality personally. Like, I'm going for the reasons, but that's a factor. You bring that up, I'm like, oh my goodness, you know? It sure is a big danger. Like, boy, taking my furry family and I to the middle of a terrorist zone. What the heck am I thinking?
Ground zero, my friend.
What do you think of that, huh,
Well,
folks?
yeah, well, I tell you, we don't want to leave our homes, do we? And we want our homes to, at least, like I said, get better than it was yesterday. This is certainly an issue that it's going to affect all of us. Some people are more isolated than others. But if you look at the people who tried to leave and listen to the stories, or the women who've gotten out, and like I said in my rant, who are you going to believe? Are you going to believe the people thinking about getting into a cult, the people in the cult, or if you're going to analyze what's really going on in the cult, are you going to believe the people who left, right? And I think the people who've lived it, did it, and who have left it, I think we have to listen to their stories. And I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you're going to say, wow, that's just their experience. Because I can tell you, it's all too common. It's all too common.
I got a great teaser to leave everybody with.
Great.
And I'm really sorry if I can't remember this woman's name. Maybe you can help me, Luke. Do you remember there was a Canadian researcher, a doctor, that reached out to us, and she's interviewed us because she read the book. But she specifically researches cults. And I'm really glad that you brought up the word cult there in your last statement, because, you know, I would like to invite the woman, and I have it in my notes. It was the one thing I forgot to share with you, because when I phoned you earlier before we are recording, Luke was in the grocery store. But I wanted to tell you that I wanted to reach out to her. She sent us an email not too long ago, again, just catching up with us. And I'd like to reach out to her and invite her on the program. And I'd like to discuss the Muslims, amongst other things, through the lens of her work, specifically as cults. Because, like I say, you just bring it up, and that's the great teaser. You know, like I think her name was Susan Palmer, perhaps, Dr. Susan Palmer. Is that it?
That does sound familiar. Yes. Canadian
researcher into cult stuff, just fantastic. I think she was out of Montreal at Concordia, I believe. Anyways, we'll get back in touch with her if you happen to see this before speaking with us. We're looking forward to that. And we'd love to ask you if you think, just like it occurred to me today when thinking about this call with Luke, maybe it would help us, again, to look at the Islam ideology, I think Luke put it best, as a cult. Because how do we treat cults in the West? We're fascinated by them, right? She'll tell you that, first of all. Everybody's fascinated with the cult stories. There's countless media and TV story specials. And B, we feel insanely sorry for the people that get brainwashed. And we understand how it happens. And like you said, like the way that we try and help those people, I think, is very similar to the way that we have to help actually the Muslim people. And the situations that they're in are ever more dire, but I think exceedingly similar, more similar to that cult phenomena than anything else that I know. But I'm curious to hear if Susan agrees. And there's a great teaser for you. So, folks, that'll be one of our first guests, I'm sure, here in the next 30 days, probably. Hopefully we can get connected with Dr. Palmer again.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, everyone, for hanging out with us again, and keep it free.